Excellent. So welcome to this month's Collaborative for Accountability and Improvement webinar entitled How to Engage Physicians in the CRP Process. Many participants in today's session are likely familiar with the basic tenets of Communication and Resolution Programs, CRPs. In general, most believe that implementing these programs in hospitals and academic medical centers, while not easy, has some distinct advantages, right? So the parties involved in an adverse event are typically insured by the institution, which makes the liability issues at least less complicated. I'm using these words, I'm choosing my words carefully here because none of this is so easy, right? The presence of risk management and quality staff, right, allows for a formalized process of investigation into the event. So involved parties can see all the facts. And then you have two processes in these places that one, a peer review process to evaluate individual practitioners' role in an event. And then you have root cause analyses or critical incident reviews that really address the role of systems. So there's a lot of availability of investigation into understanding what happened when things go wrong. Unfortunately, the same resources are often not available when events happen in the community, in outpatient areas where physicians and other clinicians are operating independently often. So in today's session, we're going to hear from three experts on how to better engage physicians when considering a CRP process. And I'm really delighted to introduce three colleagues of mine. Laurie Drill, and I'm going to just do this alphabetically, and they'll speak alphabetically in no particular order. They're all experts in their own right. Laurie Drill-Mellum is the Chief Medical Officer at Constellation, brings over 30 years as a practicing physician to help guide Constellation's work of supporting healthcare organizations to free physicians and other clinicians to focus on their mission to help, to heal, and to serve. A physician with a master's degree in public health, Laurie brings a physician's perspective as well as that of patients and family members in Constellation's efforts to promote patient safety and mitigate risk. Our next expert is Alan Lembitz, who's the Chief Medical Officer at COPIC. He has led the Patient Safety Risk Management Department at COPIC since 2002. And his responsibilities include oversight of their 3R program, the COPIC Resident Education Rotation, and the COPIC CME Education Library of live and on-demand courses, as well as the daily staffing of the 24/7 physician hotline. Pretty cool, 24/7 physician hotline. It's like you're on call all the time, Alan. Unbelievable. He speaks locally, regionally, and nationally on disclosure of unanticipated medical outcomes, specialty-specific risks, and case conferences, diagnostic errors, professionalism, medicine, and timely topics in liability, safety, and risk. He also authored articles in national journals and authored the chapter Patient Safety Education in Graduate and Continuing Medical Education in the textbook Patient Safety in Surgery. Our final expert today, Eric Way, is the Senior Vice President and Chief Quality Officer for New York City Health and Hospitals. He's an Associate Professor of Clinical Emergency Medicine at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. And I think most of you know, NYC Health and Hospitals is the largest municipal health system in the United States with 11 acute care hospitals, 5 skilled nursing facilities, 50+ community health centers, a home care agency, correctional health service, and an insurance plan called Metro Plus Health. Eric is the Fellowship Director for the NYC Health and Hospitals Clinical Leadership Fellowship, and he also serves on the board of Metro Plus Health and a faculty member for the Greater New York Hospital Association United Hospital Fund Clinical Quality Fellowship Program. So enough of me speaking. Let's hear from our experts. I think we're going to start with Laurie, so I'll turn it over to Laurie.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you and thanks for coming. I think the best way for me to start this off is to tell you that it really is possible to respond to harm events in a different way. So I work for a medical professional company based in Minneapolis, but we're in about 18 states and we insure everything from freestanding surgery centers to clinics to hospitals to big systems. And one could think that that's a barrier to supporting CRP programs, but I'm going to tell you that it's possible because we're doing it. So it took some time. It took some time because really over the last 50 or 75 years, however long medical malpractice work has been occurring in our country and across the world, we assume that we had to do it one way, which is when something goes wrong, we're going to clam up. We're not going to talk to the people who were harmed or their families, and we're going to almost go to the opposite sides of the arena. And in my opinion, and certainly among my colleagues at Constellation, we came to the belief that this was not really in anyone's best interest. It really wasn't. Certainly not in the best interest of the patients and families that we all went into medicine and nursing to serve. Certainly not in the best interest of clinicians, and certainly not in the best interest of their facilities. So we developed a program, and it's kind of under a larger umbrella, and we've really shifted our approach to harm events to a real strong early intervention approach. But this was the launching of our first program along this line called HEAL, and it's an acronym that stands for honoring our humanity, empowering people to do the right thing, acting quickly, and learning lessons from these harm events. Next slide. So when something goes wrong in healthcare, we just have traditionally used these tools we have, even when they're not really the best tools. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So I think anyone that's involved in harm events knows this is true, and that is that harm events have ripple effects. Obviously, the patient and family are ground zero, but the involved providers, the nurses, the physicians, the clerks, anyone who's a witness to it, environmental service people, the administration, the risk managers, people that have to help try and pick up the pieces for all these different people who are impacted by that. That's huge, involved providers. And this can lead to extreme distress, isolation, depression, leaving the profession. Some die by suicide, some develop substance use disorders, so that's a problem. Staff turnover is huge. If staff is involved in one of these harm events, it can impact them to the point that they can and they do leave their professions. Lost productivity is another well-recognized effect of being involved in a harm event. People get depressed, people don't show up. If they do show up, they show up disengaged, disconnected. Patient dissatisfaction, you can imagine, obviously not only being involved in something that didn't go the way that they hoped it would go is dissatisfying, but certainly if they feel abandoned by their providers and the people that they had a trusting relationship, that's dissatisfying. And that impacts reputational damage. As you all know, you can't go out to a coffee store or a meeting after church or something like that and not hear about somebody's bad medical experience or their medical woes, and how if they'd only been treated with dignity and respect and honesty, they would be feeling better about that experience. Next slide. So this is an oft-used quote by Tim McDonald, who started the 7 Pillars program at the University of Illinois. Every hour that goes by after a patient harm occurs during which we are not effectively communicating equates to another harm. That's every hour, not every day, not every week, every month. When these events happen, traditionally, we haven't told people what was going on. And I think, as most of you know, many people sue to find out or make a claim to find out what actually happened. And as it turns out, when they get involved in the litigation process, that isn't where they find out the truth, because people clam up, and that's not helpful for anyone. Next slide. So we're not on the front line of care. These are not our CRP programs. Those happen on the front line of care with the institutions that we insure, the entities we insure, but we want to support them in their role in doing this. So we had to ask ourselves these questions. Are we doing enough? Could we be doing something differently? Is there a way we could come together for the common good of everyone involved that helps make things better when these harm events occur, rather than causing secondary, tertiary, quaternary harm to the people involved in the event? And can we lead the way? This is this was a courageous step for a company like ours to embark on this. We actually launched this HEAL program in 2020. We had 40 early reports of harm events. This year in the first half, we had 400 in the first year. This year, we've had 500 in the first 2 quarters. So that's an essential component, obviously, is early reporting. We have to know about these things, just like any illness, any problem. If we don't know about it, we can't attend to it. So we asked ourselves these questions and we came up with some answers. Next slide. So the diagram on the top really shows the traditional way that our industry has dealt with harm events, the medical professional liability industry. Something happens, we may or may not get a notice, even though that's part of our coverage in the contract, but we may or may not get a notice. But the harm event occurs, we may or may not investigate it, could sit on the shelf for a few years, and then we wait and we wait and we wait. And the practitioner waits and waits and waits, and the family waits and waits and waits, and everybody waits, waiting to see what's going to happen. And as this time goes on, the pressure builds, the anxiety, the insomnia, the anger, the frustration, the hurt. Then there may or may not be a claim or suit filed, but the average length of a claim being filed and settled is something like 20 months or so for us. And it goes, and for a suit, 30 months, 30 or more years. I mean, some people can go years before their suits are resolved. And of course, during the pandemic, that's getting even longer. So people are sort of frozen in neutral, not dealing with what had happened Lord knows how long ago. So the HEAL program, our first early intervention program, and now we've really pivoted to this philosophy at our company, is we do education to prepare our insureds for when harm events are going to happen, because they happen in medicine. It's part of being in medicine. So they work with institutions to look at their own culture, their own communication, their own event investigation processes, and how do they support their clinicians and their patients and families. So, and this is what we're finding is we can resolve these cases either in 80% of them. We find that the care is defensible, and so we close the files, but we offer all these services, which I'll show you next in the next slide. But we find that we can resolve these much more quickly, which is better for everyone. Next slide. These are the 4 components of what we're doing. So again, I'm just telling you, this is possible. This is a way we can engage physicians, nurses, others in a more meaningful way. First of all, we right out of the chute, when there's a harm event, we offer clinician peer support. So a peer will call them, offer support to sort of walk with them through this journey. 2 is risk consultation. We evaluate the event, we get outside expert evaluation for the standard of care, and we also have our risk managers look at their systems. Of course, most of you know that most of these are systems errors, how these events happen, and so we offer consultation to help close the loops on things that have gone wrong. Communication assistance is really appreciated. So none of us in medical training were ever raised to think that we ourselves might make a mistake, and if we unbelievably happen to be involved in a harm event, what to do, what to say, how to handle this. And so we are there to provide communication assistance, and our insureds really appreciate our walking along with them. And then we get an outside expert case review immediately. So this is before anything is ever filed or claims are made, we get an outside expert review. And if we find that standard of care has not been met that resulted in the harm, so if we determine there's liability, then we make what we consider to be a fair and reasonable offer of compensation to resolve the case very, very early. And we're making great strides in this. So I'm here to tell you this is possible and there is a better way. So thank you for your time and attention. I don't think I have any other slides after this, do I? Oh, I was going to share one. This story I think is really helpful. This is a case where a woman was pregnant and she had a 20-week ultrasound, which was read as normal. And at 36 weeks, she had another ultrasound. And at that time, a congenital diaphragmatic hernia was diagnosed. And this baby ultimately was born and died. And this was brought to the attention of the administration at our hospital, and obviously the interpreting radiologist and their risk manager. And there was an internal review by the other radiologists in this group. None of them saw this congenital diaphragmatic hernia on the 20-week ultrasound, but somebody with the benefit of hindsight could find it if they knew it was there, kind of like a Where's Waldo thing. But what was happening in this scenario for the mother was she was feeling guilty that she didn't get a second opinion on the read of this ultrasound. So when we got outside expert reviews by radiologists, none of whom saw this hernia, when they read the ultrasound blindly, that reassured her that her physician's care met the standard of care. And we don't expect care to be perfect. We know no one's perfect, but in this case, that was reassuring, not only to the radiologist, it was reassuring to the patient, the mother and her husband. And that you can see that doing that in such a short amount of time, I think we resolved all this. I mean, worked it up, and we said we were going to defend the care. So we didn't make any payments on this. We only make payments if we think that there's liability. But in this certain situation, this could have turned into a 2, 3, 4 year case. Who knows? On a pediatric case, maybe it would have even gone longer. I don't know. But the point is that this was healing, not only for the physician, but also for the patient to get this information sooner in the course of this very painful event that really wasn't due to malpractice, but was nevertheless a painful event, obviously, for this woman and her family. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Laurie. Before we go to Alan, just a quick question for you. And if there are other questions from the field, feel free to chat them in now, or we can do that during the Q&A. I mean, it's terrific. You work for a malpractice insurer, and yet you're looking into adverse events potentially before they become lawsuits. How do you become aware of these events?
So that's a great question, David. We can't do this unless we get our insured clients reporting these to us. And that takes trust and that takes time. So I can tell you that we've had a pretty strong campaign encouraging our insureds to report harm events early. They will not be penalized for reporting harm events to us. We can't promise anyone, if they have, multiple events with large indemnity and payments, that it's not going to impact their premium. I don't think anyone could do that. But what we can say is, those cases, obviously, if they turn out to go very, very sour and south, and there's a lot of them, I'm not in underwriting, but that could ultimately impact their premium. But on the front end, we're not going to make those, we're not going to punish people for those. And I think that's what everyone is worried about. They're worried, if we tell you we have these 5 harm events, that's going to hurt us. It's not. Those bad cases, frankly, are going to turn into claims or lawsuits down the road. I mean, I think everybody knows that. And we are looking at cases all the way from a severity 3 up to 9 and up to baby deaths. And we've had HEAL files in all of these categories. We're not sort of limiting this sort of work to small, what I would call kibbles and bits things, a missed day of work or lost dentures or chipped tooth or something like that. No, we are taking all harm events, all comers from 3 and up. Okay, the smaller events can go for medical reimbursement programs, which many of us have. But I'm talking about the real significant events are included in this program, but you have to have people reporting.
There's a couple of questions in the chat. Would you like to do those now or save them for that?
Have a couple now, sure. Why don't we?
Sure. So Kendra asked, in the HEAL program, do all patients get the benefit of communication or only the ones that fit into the compensation category?
The communication support is for our insured clients. So that's our physicians, our nurses, our risk managers, our administrators. But we're helping them communicate with each other. Okay, so that's part of it too. This isn't just communicating with patients and families. This is also communicating with each other. And one of the challenges in this work, as you'll hear later, more about later, is when different entities are insuring different people involved in this event. But we are doing our best to try to mediate, facilitate communication, because ultimately that's the best world, right? Because the longer and the more people fight, the more attorneys make in all of this, and it's not really helping the patients, families, and clinicians. That's my view.
Looks like, Paulina, there's another question from Beverly here about your campaign to educate physicians. What did it involve? I have to say, I'm impressed that you managed to convince physicians to tell their malpractice insurer when they had a bad event, even if they didn't know there's a lawsuit. That's tricky business. People worry, well, if I tell them I had 4 or 5, they're going to use this to raise my premiums, all these things. So how did you do this?
I have to tell you that the vast majority of these reports come into us via administrators and risk managers. Okay. And I will tell you that the first few times that they heard about this program, I can think of a client right now in Wisconsin and their risk manager. There's several other states I could say the same thing happened. They're like, hey, we got this, risk manager, we got this, we know how to do this. We don't need you in our soup. But they find that we're there to help them. We're on their team. We want this to work out for them. This is all about collaboration. And I think that's what we haven't done very well as human beings, is collaborate in the times of these really difficult scenarios. There's no physician that ever wants to be involved in a harm event or wants anyone to even know that he or she was involved in a harm event. But what we're doing, frankly, through a lot of this is trying to normalize the fact that the vast majority of us are going to get sued. The vast majority of physicians are going to get sued. If you're a surgeon, you're just darn lucky if you haven't gotten sued, or maybe you got out early enough. I don't know. But the point is the more we normalize this and the more that we work to prevent it when it happened from happening in the first place. And that's how we learn about these things, is if people tell us about them, where were the defects in the system or the behaviors or whatever, the better. And then when bad things do happen, how do we mitigate the damages? And I'm not just talking financial damages. I'm talking emotional, professional damages.
Laurie, last question, because I do want to get to Alan and Eric. You do insure individual physicians, correct? Who are not part of it?
Yes, we do.
Are they reporting their adverse events to you also?
I would love to give you specific data on that, and I don't want to make it up, David. And we'd be happy to come back and bring people that are deeper in the weeds on that. But yes, they do report to us. But how that compares, our book of business, has got the whole spectrum of things. So I just can't give a real data-informed answer.
We have the same issue, obviously, because it runs the gamut. But I think we can come back to this later. That becomes the tricky part, right? Risk managers, these folks are used to being upfront about this. It's the doctors themselves, especially, they don't believe that they did anything wrong, which may or may not be the case. It becomes tricky. Let's get back to this in a minute. I want to go to Alan. Alan, please.
Great. Thank you, David. So COPIC does similarly insure great ranges from these small rural hospitals to large academic medical centers to small private practices to large multi-specialty groups. And I suggest throughout this that if you've seen one, you've seen one, that the audience really matters in dealing with this. And I was charged with really how to engage physicians. So my goal here is going to be giving you some practical ideas of how we've done it.
Alan, I think we lost you.
Next slide, please.
Thank you.
So we have been in this space back when people thought it was crazy. Yeah, University of Illinois Chicago, University of Michigan, the Lexington VA, and COPIC were part of what they called the early adopters over 20 years ago. We started with disclosure reimbursement programs. We moved into disclosure and resolution programs such as the 7 pillars. And as you know, the Agency for Healthcare Research Quality that launched Candor, which was really based a lot on 7 pillars, but brought in a lot of the elements. A great deal of what we've been learning from dealing with all the different reports, whether they come in whatever fashion. I think Laurie is correct. You have to develop an atmosphere of trust, and then you have to provide an access point for them. We've solved that by, I don't know whether solving is correct, but we have a group of physicians who take 24/7 call. and we are the front line, and we are the ones who manage the event so that the physicians feel like they have a colleague. We do disclosure in real time at that point. We do real time point of care, care for the caregiver at that point. So that's been a huge change, and probably I myself have been, we share it, there's 4 of us who do that, probably truly done hundreds of disclosure coaching in real time, maybe even more than hundreds. I don't actually count them. But I think that the big issue that we've run into throughout this experience over the past 20 years, 3Rs has reimbursed over 4,500 patients. There's been over 3,000 different physicians who've been through the process. Is that we really don't have one tool that fits everybody. And we have learned whether it's a disclosure reimbursement program such as 3Rs, whether it's a true CRP such as the Candor program. We try every occurrence report, and we also similarly do not penalize people for early notification. Try to determine early on which of the avenues is going to work for them. I'm going to talk a little bit in the impediment world of how come we've been doing this 20 years and we still have a seminar today on how to engage physicians. Kind of tells me that maybe we're not doing it perfectly if we have to have this seminar 20 years later, that maybe we need to do talk about the impediments, which I'll talk about in a little bit of things. But the bottom line is each one of these places is different, probably does take a village. Some of them need culture, some of them need skills, some of them need all of it. And the only other thing I would point out is that this is not something you probably should dabble in. Sorry alone does not work. Sorry in conjunction with a comprehensive approach does seem to make sense. So let's talk a little bit about the literature as I get into the experience perspective and literature. So next slide, please. This is from the 2013 Health Affairs article that really was the start of this. How do we engage better providers and CRPs? And you can read through there, and I'm going to sort of highlight which were the ones. I think first off is knowing your audience. Again, that's going to be echoing throughout this. The how you manage a small or a isolated critical access hospital or an outpatient event that happens in a 3-person pediatrics office is different than how you manage it in an academic medical center. And that's where, you know, for us, providing the resources at the point of care has been really significant because they don't have those resources. I really don't usually go into the business case. I really go into and I think physicians know that it's the right thing. But the way that we really build this is we build trust. We get people to call us frequently based on those trusting encounters. We tell stories in our educations, and then ultimately we build champions. And building champions, the people who've been through the process are our champions. The folks at the front end of the hotline are the champions. But we hope to build miniature champions throughout the entire systems that we provide. And that helps to engage people when they know that they've got trust, they've heard the story, and they can have the champions throughout that. So this is like you say, this is the paper that started this conversation. Next slide, please. If I was to give you now the personal exposure of how do I engage people when I'm dealing with, whether it's a educational seminar, whether it's a call on the hotline, or whether I'm engaged from a group, it really is the trusting relationship starts. But one of the things that is really important is that people ask kind of what's in it for me. The having control is a big deal. That you give up control of these events, you start spinning out of control, and that is part of what builds that isolation and some of the burnout, and some of the other things is that lack of control. There's other issues related to shorter claim life. We've got data that says that it really does shorten the claim life cycle. One of the things, when you talk to physicians or the hospitals related to this, but really with the physicians, is they really dislike the fact of how arbitrary it is that you can get sued for almost anything as hard as no matter, regardless of what the outcome and how hard you tried. But the thing that then, once they do get into an adverse event, is how long it takes the traditional system to work these cases through, the 2 to 3 years that it's hanging over you, and you're still having to see that next patient through this is a significant issue. I don't think enough has been done on professionalism and how we as an industry and we as a profession can call on those central tenets of professionalism to empower. We've really kind of given away the control, and we've given away the expertise to the lawyers on this, and the lawyers have our best interest in heart. The defense bar does, but we've given away a lot of what makes us tick, which is I would say is the autonomy, mastery, and purpose, which are the central tenets inside professionalism, knowing that you can manage those. And then obviously the learning and the care for the caregiver is a significant part. And I don't want to repeat entirely what Laurie's already so eloquently stated, but people are harmed on both ends of these spectrums. And the care for the caregiver is something, just sometimes knowing you have a trusted colleague that you can talk to. So now we're going to move. Those are all the good things on all the ways that we want to. I don't think we can do this subject like I said, if we were doing such a perfect job over the last 20 years, we wouldn't be having this conference today. So next slide, please. Here's the impediments that as I see it, and I think they're still out there because we're having this talk. The first one is institutional culture does in fact eat at the autonomy, mastery, and purpose that is the roots of the professionalism. And I think, those of us in the audience need to recognize that the professionalism at all the levels may be the thing, the secret sauce that can get us to turn the corner. We also have understood that delayed reporting and notification and Tim McDonald's every hour causes more harm is really at the critical aspect. We don't publish greatly on what are the impediments to doing, to managing and successfully resolving cases. But I can tell you that if we don't hear about them, we try to find out about these cases as quickly as possible and provide that access. We had a case on Christmas morning of a bariatric surgery case where there was some technical complications that occurred, and we were actually able to round up the folks that can authorize, and we were able to have that family tied into ourselves by the afternoon of that Christmas day of what we would be able to manage for them, and what were the parts that they were able to count on as we worked through it. I think a big problem, I don't know a politically correct way to say this, but inertia is letting the sleeping dog lie. We've seen this wishful thinking that maybe somehow it's not going to turn into something bad. I'm not going to get sued for this. The family is, oh, okay, they're not asking about it, so they must be fine. That inertia is coupled with culture is really the very big problem. And diversity of insurers is an issue. Michelle Mello pointed it out. I think I did a talk in 2008 for either National Quality Forum or ARC with the usual suspects, and we pointed out that diversity of insurers was the issue. There were people who were early adopters, and there are people who are late adopters, and even if we do engage the physicians and we engage the institutions, we also have to engage the insurers to get on the same page. I do have to say that we're not perfect at it yet. And oftentimes, well, if you're one company that says, I want to hear about it and do early reporting, there still is a mantra, first one to pay sort of owns the case. And that it is what it is. I don't have a politically correct way to say it. It's a serious impediment to managing cases in the non-academic or non-integrated care setting, which is, I believe, the reason you have myself as one of your panelists, is because I work in a non-integrated system where we're scattered over 12 states. Next slide, please. And the last thing is my soapbox, which is whenever we do, oftentimes, even in the candor situations, we're talking about, well, was the care, did it meet the standard, and do we have to compensate this patient? And if we don't, then we're done. And I do hearken back. I was actually in the small little room. We were sitting in the elementary school in Telluride, Colorado, teaching residents with Tim McDonald and Dave Mayer on what's the optimal way to manage adverse events. And that was actually where the 7 pillars concept was drawn up. There's patient advocates, there are patient safety people. But what I think it's still extremely valid. These 7 pillars have shifted. We tend to pick which ones are our favorites. But what I would say to all of us out there, and when you're trying to engage physicians, is don't just leap to the 7th pillar. Think about all the other things in there that are really important. You get a good investigation of your care. You get some help with communication and disclosure coaching. There's some care for the caregiver so you can see your next patient. We're going to do data and tracking. So if something that happens in one system may, in fact, we may figure out ways to educate so it doesn't happen in the next system. So that's my 2 cents for the subject, and hopefully it was helpful. And I'll move on, David, and whether if you want to take questions now or at the end.
Thanks, Alan. Pauline, any quick questions we have from our audience for Alan?
I think there was one question that already got answered in the chat box, so I don't see any more.
Okay, wonderful. Let's change gears a little bit and go to Eric, who, as we mentioned, works for the largest municipal health system in the country. Very different environment. That's probably why we picked these 3 experts. Let's hear what Eric's views on this are. Eric?
All right, thank you, David. I have to admit, I'm feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome going after Laurie and Alan with their wonderful programs and being such leaders in this field. My story will be more of a personal story. And so I matched into emergency medicine residency at University of Michigan, had no idea that they were on the cutting edge of this type of work. Rick Boothman, to the point that, right, as a young physician, I was growing up in this environment where people would make comments like, plaintiffs' attorneys just don't sue University of Michigan. And I just thought that was some sort of, myth, but apparently it was true, and it was because of CRP. And so, thinking back on orientation as an intern and sitting through, learning about a rule that was named after a child who was harmed at University of Michigan, and why they involved the family in creating the safety so that intern will never be afraid to escalate to a senior resident or to an attending. And so I kind of, grew up in that environment. And then my story, took me to Los Angeles, where I started in the emergency department at LA County USC, and was working on performance improvement, quality improvement that I learned from the University of Michigan. And I was tapped to cover patient safety for the hospital. And it was the first few root cause analysis that I led that left a pit in my stomach. And I think it was both seeing moral injury in the affected clinicians and nurses and staff in the cases, as well as like reminding myself of cases that I had had. And that's where I kind of learned about second victimization. I learned that one of the department's OBGYN was doing sorry works and second victim support. And working with the system lead, Dr. Arun Patel, really started talking about what more can we do to support our staff. And so I think, right, looking back on that, it was almost working backwards from what I grew up in at Michigan to how do we put the foundation in place to get to where clinicians can engage in CRP. And so after a few years working in the second largest municipal safety net system, I came to New York City with Dr. Mitchell Katz, and we actually agreed that the first thing that I would work on, the first thing that I would bring to health and hospitals was Helping Healers Heal, our second victim peer support program. And we felt that it was important for us to come in as new leadership to bring something to the staff that was missing rather than asking them for more. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so, right, Doug with Sorry Works and Susan Scott with the For You team greatly influenced me as I was growing in this patient safety and quality work. And we certainly have learned a lot through launching Helping Healers Heal across Department of Health Services in LA and now across health and hospitals here, but I still give a lot of credit to Doug and Susan for their influence on this. Next slide, please. And so when I got to health and hospitals, I think the key that was missing, the key ingredient was that psychological safety was missing. It was a culture from the top down that did not put the emphasis and the value on our most precious resource, which was our people, right? The doctors, the nurses, all the staff supporting them and providing patient care. We were facing a large deficit, and all the consultants' reports were just headcount reduction, what hospitals to close, what departments to close, and services to close. And our quality assurance committee at the board level was one of blame finding, punitive, right? People got fired around the table, sort of fear, and that rolled downhill. And so the frontline staff, right, had zero chance of having the psychological safety to raise their hand and say something went wrong, right? I made a mistake. Something almost went wrong, or this is a setup for something to go wrong. And so if your staff don't feel safe to raise their hand and tell you, where we've fallen down, then you have no chance of admitting you have a problem and then solving that problem. And you have no chance of doing a CRP program. At the same time, our Office of Legal Affairs has been working on and creating a CRP. It's not branded in any way, but they've significantly reduced the amount that our system has paid out. We're covered, insured by the city of New York. All the physicians are indemnified. But I think my part of this whole thing was how do we make people have the psychological safety and build a culture of safety where things are escalated, and then we have the chance of making that communication, that disclosure to families that lead to the early resolution if we feel like we did something wrong. And so our Helping Healers Heal H3 team is based on Sue Scott's For You team. You guys have all probably seen this before, the 3 tiers, but tier 1 is to change the local culture where you do talk about your toughest cases. And I remember when, I decided to do H3 as the first thing here, less than 2 weeks into the job, I got on camera on a webinar in front of the 42,000 staff that work for this system. And I talked about 3 cases that I had bottled up for multiple years, hadn't even told my wife about, where I made a mistake, right? And to role model that vulnerability and say, I'm a leader in this healthcare system, I'm willing to go first, it made a big difference and created the space and the safety, at least an opening for people to start talking about it. And so the idea is the local departmental level has changed the culture of right, gossiping, of, you know, in a corner about a colleague's tough case, of trying them in public, but actually going to them when we know that they had a tough case, asking them how they're doing, making sure they understand how important they are to the team, sharing similar cases if it's appropriate, and providing that sort of peer battle buddy kind of support. And then tier 2 is your trained peer support champions. So these I think of as a rapid response, right? A rapid response for emotional and psychological support that you deploy when there's a tough case, when there's a mistake made, when somebody's identified as struggling with signs and symptoms of second victimization or moral injury, compassion fatigue. And so we now have about 1,000 trained peer support champions across our system, 18 teams. And then tier 3 was really, right, not everybody who has a tough case, not everybody who makes a mistake needs to speak to a psychiatrist or another mental health expert. But for those that do, it's not good enough to say that you have health insurance and call the number on the back of the card. And so being able to link folks within 24 hours, anything from domestic violence support to chaplain to psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, is tier 3 there. Next slide, please. And so some lessons learned for engaging clinicians in this, I think psychological safety is the key, right? We need to have people feel safe. We need to build that culture of safety where they are willing to raise their hand and tell us when they had a bad case, when they made a mistake. Leading, and I know both Alan and Laurie talked about this, leading with caring for the caregiver. So we lead with H3, emotional and psychological support first, and then we could talk about sort of the facts of the case and disclosure and all the next steps. I think I alluded to this. Clinicians like to make diagnoses, so helping them recognize the signs and symptoms of second victimization and moral injury in themselves helps them to admit that there's a problem, and that's the first step to fixing it. Appeal to the why clinicians go into healthcare. I think most of us chose to get into medicine and healthcare because we're empathetic. We want to help others. We want to make a difference in the world. We want to improve the health of our patients and the communities we serve. And so appealing to that why, we can't improve unless we admit we have that mistake or a problem. And then I think it goes without saying, one way to get everybody in healthcare aligned is putting the patients first. You know, if you don't care about patients and the safety and the health of patients, then you probably shouldn't be in healthcare. And so what if it was you or just your family member that was the patient? I found that putting patients first doesn't matter how multidisciplinary or how different people's opinions are, you can usually get them to agree that patients are first. So those are just some initial thoughts, you know, wanted to share, but open to any questions.
Great, thanks so much, Eric. We do have about 10 minutes left. I don't know, Pauline and Nicole, if you want to put up the thank you slide, maybe we'll save that to the end with some references, but maybe we could take the slides down, we can all see each other. Eric, a quick question for you. Does your system protect peer support conversations under patient safety work product? Seem like you would. How does that work?
Yeah. So what we do, so our peer support champion, our local sort of support, is not documented as a behavioral health or mental health encounter. We don't track any of that information in terms of more than kind of a general, right, a one-on-one peer support encounter happened. You know, these were some of the triggers for or risk factors for second victimization, and these were the resources that we tapped into in tier 3. It's not linked to any case, any employee whatsoever. And we really train our peer support champions not to be therapists, to be peer support champions, right? It'd be like me talking to my best friend, me talking to a classmate, right? And we try not to get into what is discussed in a root cause analysis. There's a separate forum for that. This is focused on emotional and psychological support, right? And if they do need a higher level to be kicked up to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, then those are real encounters, like medical encounters. And so that's how we protect it.
And they be protected anyway, obviously, right?
Yep.
Patient.
Exactly.
You know, this is for both Eric and Laurie, who work in big systems. You know, if we're trying to engage physicians, you know, a doctor working in a big institution has peers around them, especially, you know, I remember when I was the new kid on the block, you're very worried about what happens with your first couple of cases you do. People are watching you because you just started. How do you make them feel comfortable? How do you get your clinical chairs involved, the clinical leadership, to make sure that these folks, especially the new ones, are comfortable in talking about these things? How does that work? Eric and Laurie?
Well, I actually commend Eric for the work that he's doing. I think that there is really, and I see Joe Shapiro is on this call, and she was, you know, really the leading edge of this peer support programs at her institution in Boston. But I think there's really a movement going on across the country now, and Boston has got a huge leader in it, and Betsy Lehman Center is supporting this work to develop grassroots peer support programs. And that can run the gamut of difficult cases or personal challenges, professional challenges. I think that's good. And that being said, sometimes people want to have peer support when they're involved in a harm event from somebody outside their system, because we as physicians, our egos are so tied into what we do, and there's so much shame in when we're involved in a harm event or something going wrong or not as we would have hoped it would. Not that that implies that there was malpractice, but just something going wrong. So I think it's nice to have both options, but I do think that there's really a growing grassroots movement to develop this peer support network. And I think it's a really good thing. And I think it's something that we should encourage with our institutions.
Thanks, Laurie. Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's starting early. We've recently, in the past year, adopted across our system that every resident is going to go through the peer support champion training, right? And I do think modeling the behavior, right? Because Laurie's right, to succeed in undergraduates, to make it to medical school, to succeed in medical school, to get into the competitive residency, to compete in residency, right? To get the good job as an attending, right? It's often about the individual, right? And it's often about how the individual is doing compared to their peers. And so it's not a surprise that your reputation, your ego is tied directly into, right, how you feel about practicing medicine. You want colleagues to feel comfortable signing out to you. You want to have colleagues feel comfortable referring patients to you, depending on your specialty. And so, right, some of it is that imposter syndrome of, right, if I admit I made a mistake, if I show vulnerability, they're going to see right through me, right, that I've been this imposter this whole time. And so, right, I do think it was really powerful for me to see, right, the GME at LA County USC, who had been there for 40 plus years, right, having tears reflecting on a case that he's carried within for the past 30 years, right? And I think, right, it is modeling the behavior and making it safe. But I agree with Laurie, right? You have to give every option, anonymous, national number, providers outside the system, people outside your department, different specialty or different discipline. Right, people are looking for different things, and we need to meet them where they are. But I think it is changing the culture from, right, starting with leadership.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks. So, Alan, you do ensure physicians who are on their own in different places, and I'm sure you've been involved with events, maybe even claims, where there are multiple physicians involved that don't have a relationship with each other. maybe you haven't, and maybe some of the others have. What do you do when you've got an event, multiple clinicians or physicians are involved? One of them thinks that clearly there was an error, it was a preventable event, the other doesn't. How do you get them all to agree to go through the process we're talking about? It's a challenge. What would you do, Alan? Thoughts?
I think it's a huge challenge. And I mean, I think first off, you sort of put the family first. What does the family know? What have they heard? And trying to at least coordinate that, because I think that's the one commonality that you would hope that all of the parties have, is that, you know, are we meeting the patient's needs, and what do they know, and what have they been told? And that at least is a good first part. I'm not beyond that. I think you're going to, if it's, you know, if you have a central insurer, or you have a central entity that's going to be speaking for them, that makes life easier. If you have a diversity, it's going to be a challenge, and different people and different entities embrace these concepts different. I think the other thing, though, besides putting the family first, which I think everybody agrees on, is I'd go back to my 7 pillars slide and say, you know, that 7th pillar, that's the hard one, to try to figure out whether or not we need to compensate this. Let's worry about the other 6. Has everybody got care for the caregiver? You feeling okay about this? Do we have an investigation going? Have we learned something so the next patient doesn't suffer this? Some of those other ones, those are maybe the softballs that we can handle, but at least there's some gain, and you build some relationship through doing that. But I think you picked probably one of the most challenging issues in all of this, particularly in those of not in the integrated care. And obviously, like I said before, we're still talking about it 20 years later. So there's work to be done.
Agreed, Alan. And I think if there's good news in this, we know the practice of medicine is moving much more towards doctors working for institutions or in big groups. But still, there's a large percentage of doctors out there working in small groups where these kinds of things come up. That's a challenge. We only have a minute or 2 left, so maybe Pauline, if you want to bring up, or Nicole, that reference slide so people can watch it while we have each of our presenters just give us a quick 1 or 2 sentence summary, take-home messages. Let's go in reverse order now. Start with Eric. Go ahead.
Well, I'll address the last question in the chat, which asked, have you changed attitudes of your leadership and the board? And I would say yes. I think the way that we've changed that quality assurance committee of the board, where we always start with how is the patient, if they are still alive, how is the family, and then the next question, how are the involved staff doing, has made a significant culture shift, and just the way that we're learning together around the table and not being punitive and blame finding. The fact that we'll say, this is a really sad case, I don't see how we could have done anything differently, has really caused ripples throughout the system, where leadership at facilities who have been here for a long time are still talking about it to new residents, interns, and fellows that are coming in. So I do think we're starting to see the benefits of shifting the culture here.
Great, thanks, Eric. Alan, final comments.
We talked about putting family first, and I think the next part that may be the secret sauce, as I said, is the professionalism, the autonomy, mastery, and purpose. The sleeping dogs don't stay sleeping forever. And you probably have those resources, and it's a matter of getting the resources to the right places and appeal to people, because the alternative of going to depositions and going through lawsuits and litigation is this may be difficult, but the alternative is really miserable, and there is a better way.
Makes sense. Laurie, final words.
I often say that we physicians have been I don't know, asleep at the wheel maybe, in handling harm events the way we know we should. And I often sort of say that we have let the MPL industry, which we're all in, which includes attorneys, hijack this relationship between patients and the people who trained for a long time to take care of them. And it's frankly morally injurious to us to turn away from them and not do the right thing. Of course, it's embarrassing. Of course, we have shame, but ultimately, we went into healthcare to serve patients and families. And the way we've been doing it, as far as I'm concerned, has been a disservice to everybody. Patients, families, clinicians, institutions. And I think the more we shine light on this and attend to these harm events earlier in an honest, compassionate way, the better it's going to be for everybody. And that's why I say we as they. We all will find ourselves in these situations ourselves or with our family members, neighbors, community. And we should really ask the question, what would you want? And you would want to be treated with kindness, compassion, honesty, and people doing the right thing.
Thank you, Laurie. Very true. Well, this brings us to the top of the hour. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you found the speakers and content useful. I certainly did. Join us for next month's webinar entitled How to Educate Patients and Families About CRP. Stay well. Have a great day.